Yogi, chill. Yugi, come on. Let's go do what we do, Yugs. Come on, Yugs. There's my good boy. Yugi, Yugi, Bun Bun. Yugi, 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 that's my Yug, my Yugs. My Yugs, my Yugs, my Yugs, my Yugs. All right, what do we got here? We are begin now. Yes. All right. Whoa, I got an echo. Hold up. Boop. Goodbye. I don't know how it works. Get that out of here. All right. Good morning and welcome to today's Friday coffee talk on things and stuff. You got a little bit of the morning coffee routine, what goes into making this. As Evil Apostate would say, we are worship the Dark Lord by consuming bits of his body. The Dark Lord, of course, being Coffee Bean. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is here this morning as well. I'm on spring break this week, so I didn't really, I kind of forgot it was Friday already. I'm kind of in, the zone. So I didn't even get a chance to coordinate with Bill to see if he was going to be able to show up. Let me see, I got to pull my headphones real quick. All right. Yugi, you need to chill. But there's certainly stuff to talk about. And so we'll get through some of that and be able to talk to anyone that cares to call in. Let me turn on my headphones. All right, let's see here. YouTube, just see if there's any sort of, okay, that's clearly not going through my headphones. So, boop. All right, and audio is through the right headphones. Okay, so today is the 13th of March, 2020, and we are in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, which has caused a lot of people a great deal of concern, and it certainly affected the lives of a lot of people, both through illness as well as through the economic repercussions of some of the precautions that people are taking. We're seeing, most particularly for our particular subject, the Mormon Church has announced that all meetings, all sacrament meetings, all stake meetings are canceled. Until we get to the point where cases are starting to wane and we're not concerned about overriding the hospital system. I think the leaders of the church are doing the right thing in trying to mitigate the severity of this pandemic as it makes its way through the communities around the world. The thought on social distancing, which is the principle behind all of this, is that we will slow down the transmission of cases so that this very contagious disease does not overwhelm our hospital and ICU systems. Majority of the people that get the disease will recover and will not have the severest form of the disease, but a significant percentage of them will actually come down with a severe case of the disease that will require respiratory support. And the ICU systems of various hospitals in different countries just are not robust enough to handle that high of volume all at once. So by employing social distancing, which means reducing gatherings of large people, then you're able to slow down that spread so that as the people that do get the illness get to that critical stage, there's not as many of them all at once. And so we can pace those cases out for our hospital systems. Anyway, okay, so that being said, though, it presents a unique opportunity to people who are in the religious sphere, and we're going to look a little bit about that. When I say unique opportunity, what I mean is that if you've listened to any of the prior videos on the YouTube channel, then you know that there are religious charlatans who prey on vulnerable populations, who take advantage of disaster and use the fear and uncertainty that people have in order to get followers, in order to get wealth, in order to get power. And what they do is they exploit those fears by claiming to have the solution to the problem. And so we can see some examples of this in the news. Let me cue it up here because there's some really interesting things that are worth reviewing. First thing that we'll do is take a look at our good friend, not you. Let's take a look at this guy. Okay, so this is Pastor Jim Bakker, and he is hawking something on the the television channel that he runs. Let's see if I can get the audio to this to work, and we'll see how it goes.
This influenza that is now circling the globe you're saying that silver solution would be effective.
Well, let's say it hasn't been tested on this strain of the coronavirus, but it's been tested on other strains of the coronavirus and has been able to eliminate it within 12 hours.
Yeah.
Totally eliminate it, kills it, and deactivates it.
Yeah.
And then it boosts your immune system, so then you can support the recovery, because when you kill the virus, then the immune system comes into action to clear it out. So you want a vibrant immune system as well as an ability to deactivate these viruses.
That's so good.
All right, so here we have Jim Baker, who is a pioneer of Christian television. So he's made his whole career on appearing on TV, exploiting people's fear, exploiting their devotion, and using his position as a religious figure to get people to send him money in exchange for prayer and to support the good work that he's doing. Yugi? And so now, when everybody is really concerned about this coronavirus, he's got a silver solution that you can buy. And this is where we're getting this weird blend of science and religion, where the gravitas that he brings is that he's a trusted figure in the spiritual lives of a lot of people who have tapped into his particular brand of Christianity. And so he's using the trust that is part of that relationship to sell a product. And you can see that the person that he's talking to is somebody who they advertise as a doctor. Let's see if they put her credentials up here. And let's see here.
But it's
boop. All right. Did they talk? I thought that they had her. Did they? I guess they didn't put it there, but he got somebody who they billed as a medical expert to talk about it, and you can see they play loose with the language. They're like, well, it's for influenza or for something like this virus, and then they start talking about how it kills it. And people who listen to these things are really on an emotional level of understanding. And so by using a lot of those highly charged words, killing the virus and destroying it and being able to survive, those are all things that really reach people so that they want, out of fear, to get the type of salvation or healing that they particularly have. And this is one of those things that as a society, we have to be aware that this type of charlatan chicanery happens so that we can protect against it and so that we can hold these types of snake oil salesmen to account. And that term, snake oil salesman, is rooted in history when there were people that were making false claims for the medicinal properties of certain things, again, exploiting people's fear of illness and disability. And Yu-Gi-Oh, you are like totally greedy. You need to just chill. And it still happens today. It still happens in the internet age. He's got all the benefit of the technology of the internet age, so he can reach more vulnerable people. And he is getting his comeuppance because people are suing him now for making these claims. Doctors cannot go around making unsubstantiated claims about the healing properties of a medicine if it has not undergone the proper sorts of clinical trials, which are there to make sure that any claims about the healing properties of a substance are backed up by evidence. And so in a time when we're all afraid and we all have the uncertainty of what this disease actually means and what it will mean for us personally, for our families, and for our society, this type of stuff just needs to not be on the airwaves. But apart from Jim Baker and his quasi-pseudoscience with religious endorsement, we have another figure that has entered the fray, and that would be Kenneth Copeland. All right, so let's see if I can get our good man Kenneth here.
Put your hand on that television set.
Yes, Lord.
Hallelujah.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Lord Jesus. He received your healing.
Yes.
Now, say it, I take it.
I take it.
I have it.
I have it.
It's mine.
It's mine.
I thank you and praise you for it.
Yes, Lord.
And I forgive if I have aught against any.
I forgive.
And I praise you that I'm well and whole.
I praise you that I'm well and whole. Yes.
According to the word of God,
According to the word of God.
I'm healed.
Yes.
And I consider not my own body.
Yes, consider not my own body.
I consider not symptoms in my body,
I consider not symptoms in my
but only that which God has promised.
Only that which God has.
Only that what the Word has said.
Only that what the Word.
And by His stripes I was healed, and by His stripes I am healed now. I'm not the sick trying to get healed. I'm the healed, and the devil's trying to give me the flu.
That's right.
Or whatever else kind of thing he's trying.
Yeah.
Oh.
Healed and well
Yes.
in the sweet name of Jesus.
Glory to God.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
So, you know, it's easy to look at these things and laugh because it's just comical. Number one, you got to respect the guy because clearly his hand is all shiny. Clearly he got to the Purell aisle first because I went to Walmart and there was no flipping Purell, and he's probably hoarding it. Number two, you know, once you pull the curtain back on these guys, it's almost just comical to see how they use this religious affectation. You know, he closes his eyes and he looks to the side and says his prayer, and he's combining, you know, the people yearning for healing with, you know, the idea of Satan, that, you know, this disease is not simply the result of a virus that through principles of selection and mutation has achieved the ability to quickly spread. It's Satan's work. You know, Satan is the one that's trying to afflict people. And so that just plays into the idea that if Satan is the one making you sick, then God needs to be the person who heals you, and he's the person who can be your connection to God. And so call that prayer line and send him the money. You know, there's a fantastic interview where a reporter confronted him, Kenneth Copeland, about his need for jets and all kinds of money and everything. And when you see the way that he responded, and when you see the sort of facial inflections that he does, you could see that it's just completely ridiculous. And let's actually take a look at this, because this is really interesting. Let me cue it up here. We got a few minutes for this. Okay, because this is just, you know, now that you've seen him in action, you gotta check him out. Okay, so let's go here, and let's go to our Chrome tab, share audio, and we're going to go ahead and bring that right over there, and we will make that boop. Okay, so we got here that share audio, yes, and we'll bring this into full screen and bring it up here. Okay, take it away, Kenneth Copeland.
Sir, we'd just like to ask you about why you don't want to fly commercial. Why have you said that you won't fly commercial? You said that it's like getting into a tube with a bunch of demons. Why do you think that?
No, listen to me just a second. Not the people.
Look at that smile.
The main reason is because of the need. If I flew commercial, I'd have to stop 65% of what I'm doing. That's really the main.
Isn't it true that you want to fly commercial so that you can fly in luxury? How much money did you pay for Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet, for example?
Well, for example, that's really none of your business, but...
Isn't it the business of your donors?
Listen, I paid.
I love this reporter.
You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
Certainly. Well, if you'd like to come out here, I'd like to give you a chance to catch your breath and have a conversation. We don't want to catch you off guard.
I love Inside Edition. You got to get this now. Hey, you listen to me? My wife thinks Inside Edition is, oh yeah. Now, thank you, Lord. Help me. Let me pray this thing. We have brought over 100. Let's see. The latest figures just came out. 122 million people to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I prayed about it, and I thought, I'm not missing that dedication in Jerusalem. Without the airplane that we have, that I bought from Tyler Perry, and I didn't pay anywhere. And Tyler's one of the greatest guys. He made that airplane so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
Well, my question then, okay, all right, but I want to get to the demons because people are very concerned about that comment.
Give me a chance
Demons.
here, Inside Edition. I love your eyes.
Okay, again, getting back to the comment. You said that you don't like to fly commercial because you don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did.
Look at that stare. That
We
is
wrestle
great.
not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
She is
term then?
totally not
just explain,
intimidated
'cause
by
it's
him.
really
This is
simple.
great.
You said you didn't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. What did you mean?
Well, let me ask you. Galatians chapter 3. If you belong to Christ, then are you Abraham's seed and heirs according to his promise. And his promise was great wealth. Glory to God. I love Inside Edition. I love the people on it. And it thrills me to get a chance to have my face on Inside Edition.
Thank you
I
very
love
much,
you, girl.
Reverend. You have a nice day.
Oh, oi. Just, when you see these people use the same sort of, body language and, the stare down and all of these things, in a impromptu conversation with a reporter that catches them off guard, you kind of see them for what they is. And there's a little bit of that BBC reporter with Elder Holland when they interact there. The Mormon Church is not tapped into the same level of that type of very performance level spiritualism that you see Kenneth Copeland and other televangelists have. There's a very dynamic performance element to the televangelist, and you can see he's just using that same tool set with the reporter there, knowing that the cameras are pointed at him. Mormonism has a very different sort of spiritual language, and it's a spiritual language of vocal inflection, of body language. If you want to hear, it's even more than vocal inflection, it's even audio processing. If you go back and you look at the video of N. Eldon Tanner in 1978 announcing the lifting of the priesthood ban, there's something really interesting that happens at the beginning of that video. And that is when he stands up at the podium, he starts talking, and that, what I call the God reverb or the God echo of General Conference, is not turned on. So he's just speaking into the microphone and it's just his straight voice. And then a few seconds after he starts speaking, they flip the switch and suddenly it's that grand echo that makes anything seem like the voice of God, 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 God. And it's really remarkable. Okay, so let's go back here. Yugi, you need to chill, dude. Come here. All right. You just stay there for a second now. You stole that. I didn't give that to you. You little thief. And now you're going to go bury it somewhere? All right, so what do we got here? Okay, so let's share screen, and we're going to share a Chrome tab, and let's go back to our good friend Kenneth Copeland. Actually, you know what? We're going to go somewhere else beyond that now. We're going to go to... let's go to Kenneth Copeland, and I want to share downloads. Okay, let's see if we can bring this here. Okay, so speaking of healings and miracles, which is a little bit of what they're alluding to here, we have in Mormonism our own miracles. And so a few years ago, I was blessed to have the opportunity to go to the Museum of Church History in Salt Lake City. And one of the things you will see if you go to that museum is a remarkable display. And it's a bandana. It just looks like a red bandana. But when you read about it in the placard, it says, on July 22nd, 1839, Joseph Smith gave healing blessings to church members who were sick with malaria in Nauvoo and across the Mississippi River in Iowa. So remember, this is 1839. The church has kind of been ousted out of Missouri, and
They found a bit of land. It was called Commerce, Illinois. It was on the banks of the Mississippi, and most of it was swamp land. And, if you're familiar with how malaria spreads, it spreads by mosquitoes that thrive whenever there's standing water, i.e. swamps. And so the saints were started to gather there, and they started to be afflicted with malaria, which is a bloodborne disease spread by mosquitoes. And so, you have all of these saints that are having that relapsing fever and all the symptoms of malaria. A non-member asked that a blessing be given to his dying children, and Joseph sent Apostle Wilford Woodruff to the family with this red handkerchief, promising that the children would be healed if the handkerchief were used to wipe their faces. And they were healed. And you can see this picture, this miraculous cloth of healing, is on display at the Church History Museum because Mormonism has holy relics. If you think about it, if you think of the Catholic Church as having, it wouldn't be surprising for them to have a bunch of relics that they claim are part of miracles. But if you go to the Church History Museum, they have that. Malaria sickened many saints as they drained and cleared the land of what would eventually become Nauvoo. On July 22nd, 1839, the people witnessed a day of God's power as Joseph went among them, giving priesthood blessings to the sick, leading to many miraculous healings. Again, you can see that red bandana behind glass on display at the Church History Museum. So, what of it? Well, it's pretty interesting because Mormonism does have a strong tradition of claiming miraculous powers of healing. If you start to read church history, you'll see every once in a while, just peppered in among the experiences of Joseph Smith, a claim that, he healed such and such. If you look at some of the newspaper clippings regarding some of the early church ideas, early on, they didn't believe in medicine, and they believed that priesthood healing was the way to effect restoring somebody to health. And that was just part of it. And when it didn't work and somebody died, then it created a problem. And eventually that idea that faith healing was the only approach went away because Mormonism is eminently adaptable to whatever needs to change in order to serve the purposes of the group. It will ultimately change. And we can go into that. The first miracle of the restoration effected by priesthood power was a exorcism of somebody who was possessed by a demon. And you can see that, when you're in a time period before people understand germ theory, before people understand how the nature and source and cause of disease, things like demons and devils were used to explain them. And so, when you look at something like this malaria outbreak, they didn't even have to invoke the notion of demons, but Joseph Smith could still claim healing power because a percentage of people that get malaria, significant percentage of people that get malaria will get better. And so if he just sends this cloth around and has everybody wipe their face, fortunately malaria is a bloodborne disease and not a droplet-borne disease, then people will get healed because their body will naturally recover from the disease, but now he can claim that he has that power of healing. Now, if you go to the Thoughts on Things and Stuff post where that image is posted and see where it's posted in different places around Facebook, you'll see people sharing their own personal family story. And you'll find one person said, I guess they missed out on my own family's story because I had a great-grandfather that died. Despite getting a blessing from Joseph. And so, it's one of those things where you only remember the reinforcing events, the ones that seem to be miraculous because they're tied with this handkerchief. But if you were to take all comers and then compare it to other diseases and the natural course of the disease without any sort of faith intervention, you would see that it's not really statistically significant. And that's reflected also in the fact that in Utah hospitals, where there's a higher percentage of people that get priesthood blessings of healing, there's not a lower rate of death or complication from diseases. It just matches the same sort of disease rate that you would find in any other hospital or in hospitals where there are predominantly other types of faith traditions that may be attempting faith healing. That's kind of the incidental side of this faith healing concept. The other side of it is the dangerous side. And that is where people then, because they are believing the faith claims of these pastors, for example, Kenneth Copeland. He talked about somebody who put their hand on the screen, who then is saying that God has cured me. Well, they may, even if they're having symptoms, they may be convinced that those symptoms aren't real or aren't significant. And so there's no reason for them to isolate themselves. And so they may actually become a vector spreading the disease to more people than they would otherwise if they simply followed the advice of secular authorities that were trying to act based on principles of science rather than on claims of faith. And it's interesting because when you see how people act on these faith claims, it almost becomes a defiant act of faith to go against what secular authorities may want. And you can hear this echoed in President Irene when he talks about one of his faith healings. He talks about how the doctors were mad because they were trying to get him out of there, but he was going to go and give a blessing to this girl who then was able to walk when they thought she was going to die. There's a video on the miracles of President Eyring that you can see on the Thinker Thoughts YouTube channel that's very revealing in this regard. Okay, so let's see. What else do we have going on in the news? Let's see here. Share screen, and we'll go to our tab. Okay, we covered that. Okay, so other than COVID and the church closing down meetings, including sacrament meetings for the foreseeable future, there were a couple of other things worth noting going on. And one of them is the fallout. Yu-Gi-Oh! You leave that cat alone! One of them is the fallout from the church's seeming reversal of policy regarding holding gay individuals to the same standard that they hold heterosexual individuals regarding the law of chastity, which would mean, according to the initial release and the change of the policies, that if you were gay, you could have a romantic relationship with the object of your affection as long as there was not a sexual act, something that would violate the strict interpretation of the law of chastity. And a lot of people came out in BYU in support of that change, celebrating that it seemed to be a step of progress for the church, only to have it reversed a few weeks later when the church issued a clarifying statement, which we've covered before with Bill Reel, that said, no, even though we've changed the letter of the text of the honor code, the principles are exactly the same. And following that clarification, a lot of people who felt very hurt and betrayed by this seeming reversal took to the streets in protest. And we saw protests on the campus of BYU in Provo. We saw protests in New York City at the Temple in Manhattan, and we also saw protests in BYU, Idaho. And this is where we now start to see the intersection between the more fundamentalist, strict interpretation of the religion and people who are trying to push for progressive change in the religion to adopt an attitude of acceptance and love towards LGBT people rather than the tacit bigotry that goes along with how the church is teaching things now. So what happened in some recorded events is pretty revealing. So we have one photograph that was released and spread on Twitter of something that the conflict between these two forces saw happen. And that was where you can see on the right side of the screen there, a lot of people protesting the change, waving flags, rainbow flags in support of LGBT individuals on campus and in support of changes which would move towards tolerance. And somebody from the DesNat side of the ideology here took a truck right next to where they were and presumably modified it so that its catalytic converter was no longer working, so that it spewed out copious amounts of diesel smoke or fuel smoke and basically bathed all the protesters in smoke. And if you do a search for hashtag DEZNAT, DEZNAT on Twitter, you'll find this image. And I think there's a video clip. I tried to find the video clip of it so that you can really see the effect of it, but I wasn't able to in the early morning this hall. And you can see that people are celebrating this and saying, you know, that that's kind of what they deserve for going against the prophets, for going against the brethren. And furthermore, on another campus, there were people gathered together to protest this change, only to be confronted by people who felt very righteous in their position of defending the brethren. And the expression of that righteousness was to, much like certain prophets, scriptural prophets in the Book of Mormon, to preach the word of God to them in the form of reciting the proclamation on the family. And there's a video of one particular individual that became sort of a standard bearer or a hero to the DEZNAT people because of his boldness in defending the truth and defending the prophets. So let's see if we can find that video clip. That is going to be the BYU Defender video clip. And I will see if I can share that now. So we'll go to share screen, and we'll go to the BYU Defender and share the audio. Unfortunately, this was taken with vertical video, and so it's not as optimally queued up, but I'll see if I can make a better version of it for my YouTube channel later. All right, let's see what we can do. So you can see that things kind of got heated on campus there. He starts out by reading the first line of the proclamation of the family, and then immediately people moved to try to silence him. And that's not unsurprising given the nature of campus protests and how people on different ends of an ideological spectrum confront each other. The first person that confronts him ends up pushing him, and you can see there's a little bit of physical nature of that interaction when, let's see if we can catch that moment. Oh, I don't think I can stop it just the way that interface is, but that moment when somebody comes up and shoves a sign in his face and pushes him a little bit then became something that was focused on by the DEZNAT Twitter community because they saw it as a manifestation of how the seemingly loving, progressive liberals that they use that term as a derogative term, would resort to violence in order to affect their own position. And so this is one of the things that is always a danger when you start having protests, is that any form of interaction is then going to be latched onto and then used as motivation for further sorts of action. So people in the DesNat community may say, well, if they're going to be violent towards us, then we now have a right to defend ourselves. And that may include the use of physical violence or threats of violence. And we're justified because it's a tit for tat scenario. We're, simply responding in kind with how they do. And that's really the danger of all of this, particularly when you have people who then can draw upon scriptural justification, because in the Book of Mormon, you have people who will go so far as to commit murder in order to defend some notion of God's plan and God's kingdom. And that mentality is something that we're seeing be adopted by certain fundamentalist factions of the Mormon Church. When you look at some of the FLDS people, where they're, that faction is far off of the center and off of the mainstream and adopts more of the older positions, you'll see that the notion of blood atonement, which is a religious justification for violence and murder, is still held onto, and so that's pretty dangerous. Okay, so now that individual has, as is not surprising, become a little bit of a hero in the DesNat or Deseret nationalist camp. And he went on to post a explanation and justification for his actions, which I think is actually worth taking a look at, just so that you can see the type of ideological fuel that people on that side of the spectrum are using. Now, I think a lot of us might be very familiar with this, because many of us, if we were once Mormon, understand very much how this line of thinking goes. If you simply root your morality in obedience and deference to prophets, then you can use that grounding as a justification for any number of things. And if somebody seems to be making a good argument, a moral and ethical argument, that is opposed to your position, which is rooted in the prophets and apostles, you can simply say that it's Satan's plan, that it's a deception, that it's the cunning designs of the evil one, and it's very easy to override what would otherwise be a very compelling argument. So let's see what we can find here. Let's go to the tab for, yes, okay, so this is probably one of the more prolific DesNat websites. It goes by the name Tienkin's Javelin. And already just using the word javelin in there is, it's an allusion to some sort of violent act. And so that's a little bit alarming just off the bat. Let me modify our aspect ratio here so that we get something a little bit better for the screen. All right, I think if I go just a little bit wider there. Okay, so what do we got here? So here you can see a screen grab where you have the individual standing like Samuel the Lamanite, facing the evil Nephites and trying to call them to repentance. And you can see that type of imagery is something that he draws upon. He's claiming to be, the name is Marcus Cathalinio, the first-hand account of a BYU student who stood up to the masses. So you can already see that he's portraying these events as though he is the hero of the scenario. Let me see if I can change. There we go. Okay. Editor's note. And again, this guy is not the person who owns this website. They simply are allowing his article justifying his actions to be hosted here. This is a letter from a BYU student who read the family a proclamation to the world on campus during a protest rally after the honor code clarification from CES was announced. English is his second language, and editing was kept to a minimum to preserve the voice of this primary source. Full video is available here, and that is the video that we just watched. All right. When the clarification letter came through after the BYU Honor Code change fiasco, we knew the battle wasn't ending there. It had been a long 2 weeks of investigations, recordings, and transcripts trying to piece together how such a PR nightmare could have happened all of the sudden, polarizing the entire campus overnight. We knew quite confidently that the explicit authorization of homosexual behavior had not been authorized by the brethren and was likely the action of a rogue movement within BYU determined to pass these policies from their personal inclinations. It felt like the family proclamation guys were the only ones to know the full story, aside from some Twitter folks following the story as nervously as a teenage homeboy waiting for the next text back from his EFY crush. So there's already a conspiratorial element to his interpretation of events here. When he talks about that, that the original changing of the wording had been some sort of rogue movement within BYU, this speaks to, people whose minds are cemented in the way that the prophets have talked about a certain issue in the past will always kind of fall back on the fear and paranoia that is inherent to having an adversary who can control people and people who secretly adopt the principles of Satan in order to try to, work against the kingdom of God. That sort of conspiratorial theme is woven throughout church history, and you can find it in the rhetoric of General Conference, and it trickles down into what you'll hear on a stake conference or any sort of other Sunday. And so, we've had people who have claimed that a rogue element in the church was responsible for the gospel topic essays on race and on polygamy. And so those things, even though they're found on the official church website, are really secretly designed to destroy people's faith. So Yu-Gi-Oh has a sister dog called Yoja, who's decided that it's her job to bark as loud as she can. Yoja, chill. Anyway, all right. Let's keep going here because this is interesting. Okay. Most of the common folks of BYU were living their lives during these 2 weeks as they always do, not looking for trouble and, heaven forbid, the dreaded smell of potential confrontation. The classic and tragic unawareness of the modern man willing to defend his principles and beliefs only as long as they don't offend anybody. Contention is of the devil, Jesus taught, yet it seems that the low testosterone men of our day have interpreted contention as any situation that requires more energy, passion, or dedication than choosing between the regular chicken sandwich or the edgy, spicy chicken sandwich for their daily Chick-fil-A ration. They praise Nephi, Abinadi, and Captain Moroni of our beloved scriptures as men of courage and godliness, yet fail to recognize their own cognitive dissonance when they disavow the men of the church willing to go into the arena to defend the good name of God. This is really good because, he's starting off with some kind of red pill crap where he's, the people who are celebrating this seeming progressive change in the church, celebrating the idea that gay men and women should be free to enter into romantic relationships and not be subject to hate and persecution for doing so. Those are low testosterone men. And, can you blame them? They grew up with these images of Nephi and Moroni and Abinadi as like these cut, ripped guys, with their shirts off and stuff that, so their image of the prophet of God is not like some portly bearded guy in a tunic. It's like, Arnold Schwarzenegger with a headband, who's totally ripped. And so that, it's kind of a childish interpretation of it. But, you could say that there's a metaphor there that the strength that is depicted in these paintings about the prophets is just a metaphor for spiritual strength. And much in the same way that you could look at the Renaissance pictures of angels that have wings and say it's not literal wings, it's just a metaphor for the quickness of and the ethereal nature of angelic beings. But still, it affects kids that grow up with that mindset, and so now, they're depicting and making a parody of men who would stand up for the rights and dignity of the disenfranchised in Mormon culture, LGBT youths, and depicting them as low testosterone men. And it's almost kind of just like this dude bro kind of flex on progressive Mormons on campus that I'm sure their in crowd really sees as, really, yeah, you got him. You stick it to him, yeah. Whereas everybody else is like, what kind of childish, ridiculous crap is this? But let's keep going. All right. What do we got here? Okay. Let's see. Well, there was one other thing. Oh, yeah. So this concept that it's funny because this notion that contention is of the devil is actually one which seems to have a double-edged effect here. And that is that by demonizing contention or demonizing conflict, then the church is actually able to silence critics, because if a critic then raises a counterpoint to something that they think is a mistake in the church, well, they can simply be they can be demonized as bringing conflict into it. Now, let's see here. I'm going to have to do something about this doggo, so you have to give me just a second because Yoja has crossed the line. Hold on. Yoj. All right, that's sadly inevitable when you have 3 dogs and 1 cat. All right, so let's keep going here. This is not what Jesus would have done. Jesus loved everyone. Yes, he did, but because he loved everyone, he occasionally called them the sons of the devil for betraying the doctrine he had set for them. He used righteous indignation and violence to cleanse the temple of the past that had infested it. Isn't that the same Jesus you professed, Latter-day Man? Or is it the inconvenient Jesus that would reveal the weakness of your own heart? Was cleansing the temple contention? No, it was righteous indignation. Christ's love language is repentance because he wants you back in heaven with him forever, and persistence in error will not get you there. He ate with the sinners, not to comfort them in their lifestyles, but because they needed him the most to get back on the right track. Using Jesus' injunction to love everyone as a justification for sin is blasphemy. That's some powerful stuff. How do you deal with people on 2 sides of an issue, both of whom are drawing upon the figure of Jesus as justification for their actions? People who history has shown rooted themselves in scriptural justifications for what we now see as hateful, violent, or bigoted behavior, thought that they were doing the right thing. They thought they were defending true and right principles in the past. People generally don't, within themselves, say, I'm going to do something evil and bad, and that's why I'm standing up for these things, because I'm really bad. They believe that they're standing for good principles, and they act on that. And the question is just, if you haven't really examined the root of your position regarding those principles, then you may end up standing for something that causes real harm. But people can find any justification that they want. All right, so you can see that he's using some loaded language here for this. He's saying that the position of people who are defending LGBT students and critical of the church's position have weakness of heart. And they claim that those people are misusing Jesus's injunction to love everyone. And it's funny because that is the very thing that, many people find appealing and attractive about Jesus, is that if it is true that we alone are not able to judge another person and that we are all sinners, then Jesus' injunction to love is exactly something that you should do. And people are not using the fact that Jesus commanded his followers to love one another as a justification for sin. They're finding it as a reason to see the experienced and lived lives of other people not as sin, but as an expression of their individual nature. And so that is, you're always able to create straw men to make arguments against, and it becomes more difficult to really get down to the nature of these issues if you don't do a deep dive and a real conversation between people. Here we see people clashing on campus, drowning each other out by either yelling the proclamation on the family or singing "Love One Another." And it's not really a forum that changes people's minds other than showing people that they're not alone, which is a powerful thing in and of itself. And it's happening on both sides. The fact that there were hundreds of students who were willing to come out and be critical of the leadership and risk their own position in the university is something, and it tells people that they're not alone. But by the same token, the fact that this one man was able to stand up and boldly proclaim the family proclamation was another attempt at showing people on the other side that they weren't alone. And when you follow the Twitter hashtag and the events around this, you'll find a lot of DesNat people looking at this video saying, why there's only one or two people that goes up to the guy and pats him on the back and gives him an expression of support, and there should have been more people who were willing to support him, especially on the campus of God's University. So let's keep going here. Okay, so now let me make a clear distinction. I can see that being gay in the church is not a straightforward path. To be slightly caricatural, they are basically asked to live like monks in order to stay in good standing. Well, at least he's showing the degree of empathy that would allow him to concede that. I have no solution for this. I get that it is very, very difficult, and I truly admire the folks that decide to stay with these terms. I understand the ones who leave, and I think the Lord will figure it out with them. I'm not condemning the folks trying to express compassion for an already tough situation. I have many gay friends that I love dearly, independent of what goes down in their bedroom. The classic, I have many gay friends. That's great. I'm condemning the leaders of these activist groups utilizing their pain to achieve their own satanic agenda to destroy the family as a central social unit of our societies. I am condemning the leaders of these activist groups utilizing their pain. That's interesting. So what is he saying there? I mean, I think he's kind of putting the students of BYU sort of in the category of the useful idiot, in that he's saying that these people who think that they're standing up for the experience and the harsh treatment of LGBT people, they think that they're defending their friends, but they're really just being pawns in some sort of game played by the leaders of the activist groups who have a satanic agenda. And again, you're appealing to the adversary in order to explain what he's going. The people who have family members, who have parents who maybe their father or mother was advised to enter into a heterosexual relationship despite the reality of their homosexual nature in the past. We see families that are severely traumatized by the outcome of that sort of situation, which was recommended by church leaders in the past. We see people who have a child, a son or a daughter, who's confronted with the reality of their homosexual nature that then has to deal with the past teachings of the church and the absence of a truly inclusive plan of salvation that has a place for them, and struggling with that issue. And parents who see their children not as fallen and wicked and struggling with this, but as deserving of every element of God's love and the acceptance of his church, struggle with this. That's not a satanic agenda. And people who go through this and experience the pain and look out and see others going through similar degrees of pain and want to alleviate it and want to make it better and to pave a way for future people to not have to experience that are not following Satan's agenda. They're acting out of compassion and love based on their own lived experience. And unfortunately, many times it does have to be out of their lived experience, because the indoctrination that they've received from the church, which demonizes anyone who has what they are calling same-sex attraction or anything outside of the norm, makes those people very other until you're confronted with somebody that you know, that you already love, who's dealing and struggling with it. And that's unfortunately the way that a lot of people, it's the only way they have their mind changed. But we don't have to worry about this guy because he has many gay friends. So let's see here. Many evil-intended apostates are using kindness and compassion as a gateway to subvert the church to their own philosophies of modernity. Evil-intended apostates. This is kind of interesting. It's almost like the people who are defending the church's position have to realize that people who are critical of how the church is managing this are kind and compassionate. And they have to struggle with the disparity between that flagrant kindness and compassion with the arrogant and bigoted hate that their own revered leaders seem to adopt. And so you could say, well, that kindness and compassion is a trap. It's the tolerance trap. And of course, that's something that they've heard from church leaders themselves. So it's no big surprise that they would do that. Because we have the concept of the wolves in sheep's clothing. So during my many interviews over the last weeks, the leaders of these LGBT protests have openly called for a redaction and abolition of the family proclamation. They believe that through social action and societal pressure, they will bend the will of the brethren, whom they believe are not directed by God, but rather old men out of touch with the brave new world they are trying to bring to pass. They cite reversals of the priesthood ban and polygamy of examples where outside societal pressures led to changes in the church. Fair point. From their point of view, these protests make all the sense in the world. If they are correct, then the path they're taking is absolutely coherent. Well, at least he acknowledges that. I got to give him credit for that because, further up, he talks about how, these low testosterone men don't realize how the cognitive dissonance is clamoring within their skulls or whatever. Well, there's probably a little bit of cognitive dissonance there when he's like, well, they're using kindness and compassion for evilness, and they have good justification that probably makes sense given the racism and the polygamy of the past. And if they're right, it actually does. It's coherent and it makes sense. But they're satanic and they're low testosterone. So Satan, his dudes aren't buff because they have low testosterone. All right. Now, this prophet. To the fellas I confronted on Wednesday, let's see what we got here. To the fellas I confronted on Wednesday, I do not believe that you are correct on that point. I believe that the proclamation will be the last stand, on which many well-intentioned but at times naive members will fall. In the name of kindness and compassion, they will abandon the guidance of the brethren of the Holy Spirit, because the price to pay to stand against the global LGBT agenda, which I consider extremely different from individual homosexuals just doing their thing, will become greater and greater. People lose their job if they're not fully on board with the program, putting the livelihood of their wives and kids on the line if they do not bow to the brave new world of progress. They're guilty of wrongthink. I'm not even talking about somebody hurting a gay guy physically. That's reprehensible. I'm talking about even thinking in the secrecy of your mind that maybe, just maybe, something isn't quite right with the way the social mores of our civilization are headed. They cannot tolerate that, and everyone, even the insignificant town of Provo, Utah, in the middle of the western desert, must bow to the new god of diversity. This guy's really good with language. I think there is danger in groupthink. There is danger in thought police. There is danger in intruding into individuals' private minds and beliefs and punishing them for ways of thinking. And so this is true regardless of what side you may be on something. Thought policing is a totalitarian concept. And so I think Mormons understand the dangers of that with their history of persecution. And so it makes sense that those themes would be woven into how they perceive attacks on Mormonism itself. The problem is they're conflating criticism of doctrine and policies with thought policing. And they claim that there's a difference between hurting somebody physically and just having private thoughts in your mind. And the problem is that the policy on the BYU campus is not simply a private thought in someone's mind. It's something that really affects people. It affects their lives. It affects their choices. It affects their self-concept. And so, he's arguing the wrong point if he really wants to confront this particular issue, because he's put up a straw man of his own position. But this is what students do. These are young people who are still wrestling with the world and wrestling with how they know. And, anyone who's coming out of a dogmatic fundamentalist religion, which is rooted in ideas and principles that are several decades behind the rest of the world, as Mormons, in the 1970s were on the issue of race, it takes them time to get through that and to untangle, principles that are rooted in false authority and things that are actually legitimate and consistent with ethics and morality. And so, I have hope, because he's trying to apply some element of logic to what he's writing here. And I'm hoping that as he wrestles with the cognitive dissonance of, well, why are they using kindness and compassion? Eventually he's able to see that there are some real differences and real problems with his position. I reached out to the DesNat Facebook group to try to see if I could get somebody from them to come in and represent authentically their point of view, but apparently people don't like my blog in that group, and so nobody was willing to. Okay, so let's go back to this. I do not hate these people. I honestly do not. In many ways, I feel for them. I spoke up at that protest at BYU because no one was saying anything to push back against that agenda. I did not insult them. I read the words of the prophets. The one document that I pray will stand against the illusions and deceit of the brave new world. The family, a proclamation to the world. If there is a hill to die on, it will be this one. The defense and sanctity of the God-given nuclear family. I can appreciate that somebody raised in the Mormon culture would really see the nuclear family as something that they want to defend, because it really is the heart of Mormonism. It's what ties and binds Mormons together, is this notion of God's family, which we see in a microcosm in our own family. And we're taught to interpret and perceive God's love for his children and emulate that in our own family lives. And it's something that, every human who's been raised in a loving family has a special bond and connection with that group of people. And it's something that, very much is close to everybody's heart. And that, because it's so close to people's heart, it's something that can really be tapped into for purposes of religious dogma or otherwise. And when you look at history, groups that are totalistic, that really want to command control over people's lives, one of the things that they do assault is the individual family. Any group that somebody may see as more important, more worthy of following, more devoted to their love and well-being is a threat to a government that wants to control that. So when you go look at communist China, when you look at other, totalitarian states, one of the things that they do assault is the family. And they say, well, anybody can raise anyone, and so it's not that big of a deal. And so there's some historical fuel to the fears that they have there. And I think what they are missing is a more expansive view of what a family can be. Because if you look at families that are not the conventional nuclear family, but are families that may have gay parents, then you'll find much of the same principles of love and care and compassion that are the heart of those families exist with no difference than any other family. And you could say, well, there's higher rates of divorce or infidelity or something like that, but there are high rates of divorce and infidelity in heterosexual couples as well. The fact that something is not perfect is not a reason to do that. And there's a real danger in looking at statistics and saying, well, such and such family arrangement has a higher statistic of A, B, or C, and so we need to cultivate that. And there's a video on YouTube put out by the church where they take a BYU professor who starts to make these claims. He lays out these statistics of heterosexual nuclear families and how they're better for this and better for that. And the problem is that when you start using those type of statistics to say this should guide our public policy, then you end up giving government fuel for affecting some very unethical and harmful things. If you were to say, for example, that black families are statistically less, they have less wealth, there's less stability. Well, what are you going to do with that data? Are you going to then say that we need to do things to try to minimize the number of black data? Or are you going to actually go back and look at the root cause of those things? Because if you're going to say that homosexual families have higher rates of infidelity, well, or children that drop out or something like that, you have to first of all back it up, because there's data that shows that it may be the opposite of that in terms of how well their kids do. But on top of that, if you're going to misattribute the reason for those statistics being off, then you may end up exacerbating things by treating the wrong thing. It's just really dangerous when you start using population statistics to guide those type of policies and procedures. Okay, so I would just say that, this is a boogeyman that you're going to hear the church use, that people who are advocating love and tolerance and acceptance for gay people are enemies of the God-given nuclear family. And that's really a short-sighted view of what a family can be, because they could be taking the position of we need to expand our view of what a family can be and create a wider vocabulary for how love and the positive aspects of a family can be found in many different situations. Okay, so come what may, sociologists proving that small tribes in Botswana actually raise their kids in a communal setting instead of with their parents to prove that this whole family gig is a sham and a patriarchal oppressive system to put down minorities, false preachers claiming to love the church but determining to destroy it and the faith of its members from the inside, the news media defaming the good name of our church and our God because we do not bow to the philosophies of men, the enlightened employer who believes that being pro-life is a reason enough to fire you from your job. The brave new world of progress does not convert and persuade, it conquers, and it conquers only because no one is pushing back. We are afraid of the consequences. We have sold our birthright for a pottage of lentils. He probably has a good future in propaganda. He's tapping into some of the fears that people have. There's even some kind of allusions to some of the temple language there, where there's this notion of false preachers that are subverting the word of God in an effort to undermine faith. It's funny because, now he probably wouldn't say that, if you call somebody the N-word on the job, or specifically, reject somebody in your place of employment because of the color of their skin, that he would probably not have any critical words of an employer who would subsequently fire you for that. And yet the men who he is rooting his position in, the prophets of the church, have held that position in the past, which, if you follow this channel and you look at the letter from Delbert Stapley to George Romney, you can see documentary examples of that. But when you're not taking your position from an informed stance where you don't know the full history of the church, because the church has whitewashed its history, you may think that the blessed brethren have never held these terrible positions in the past. And so you don't have to wrestle with that and struggle with the implications of that. And this whole document reads like somebody who is unfamiliar with that history of the church. And so this is what happens when you whitewash your history, is you end up having naive defenders who you're happy to use, to try to maintain your position, but they open themselves up to real weaknesses in their position when they're confronted with someone who does know the history. Okay, when I walked up to the edge of the stairs, I wasn't sure what was going to happen or what I would say. But I knew that my intent was pure. See, this is the thing. People on both sides believe that their intent is pure. Just, have you examined what you're actually doing, regardless of your intent? Intent does not actually have a moral dimension to it. Intent is simply your motivation, what you think you're doing. You need to examine what you're actually doing. I felt a calm serenity that things would be fine and that truth must be defended. I believed it was one of those times where I could let the Lord fulfill his part of a promise. Like when Enoch was called to preach repentance in his days. Go forth and do as I have commanded thee, and no man shall pierce thee. Open thy mouth, and it shall be filled, and I will give thee utterance. I ain't no prophet, but these promises don't only apply to prophets. They apply to men who fear God more than they fear the world. And when I walked to the edge of the stairs, I stopped fearing the world. Wouldn't you want to feel that the Lord is right by your side when you fight? Well, my friends, that can only happen if you fight for his side. The apostates are left to kick against the pricks. Okay, so I'm going to avoid jokes about him being the prick that people are kicking against, but it's interesting to see just how deeply rooted his own moral justification for all of this is. And this is where, people who believe that they are standing up for right can draw upon the stories in Scripture to bolster their feeling of moral superiority in standing up for what they believe is right. And if you read how low-level members of the church stood up against people who would criticize church leaders on the issue of race, you would see the same sort of kind of self-righteous justification that did not age well. And I suspect that, in a decade when this particular individual has had time to grow in understanding, in knowledge, and in empathy and compassion, he would look back on these words and see also that they do not age well. But in the meantime, he's calling on other people to stand up. And it's a little bit interesting. We've seen now the prophets on a number of times call for the members to really stand up for their beliefs in social media. And you see that all the time, but it is very rare, as this individual is pointing out, for people to actually stand up and defend the church and its teachings and positions, because they don't have to defend it on uncontroversial things. Love your neighbor. Okay, well, everybody kind of believes that and teaches it regardless of what religion they're in, so you don't really have to stand up and defend that. See your gay people as broken and in need of fixing, and having no humane expression of the enormous part of humanity that is your romantic self. It's harder to defend that, because then you have to root your defense in statements of the brethren, and there's just not a whole lot there that is defendable on social media, because you'll be confronted by people who can bring to bear the history of the defunct positions of those church leaders and the absence of the moral foundation of their claim to authority as moral leaders. And that immediately deflates you. But on top of that, you have the real lived experience of people who have been injured and hurt under the weight of that type of hateful rhetoric. And, when you are confronted with those things, it's harder to stand your ground in a position of blind obedience, with the wounded person right in front of you. But okay, so let's see here. We need men and women of the church to be strong in this. You cannot have your main residence in Zion and your summer cottage in Babylon. Understand that I am not targeting the naively misled folks that do not see the bigger picture at the end goal of these protests. I am addressing its leaders, those who know perfectly what they are doing, leading the sheep carefully down to their spiritual slaughter. And I think this is kind of where we have a little bit of a mirror thing going, because he's seeing all these people that are on the campus doing the protests as sheep, naive, ignorant. They're not looking at the wider picture. And I think those of us on the other side of the fence here probably see him as a sheep, as naive. He really hasn't done a deep exploration of the moral conflicts in the history of the church and the natural implications of those things in terms of what it means about the claimed moral authority of the leaders. And, I'm not sure who he thinks the leaders of these protest groups are, because most of these groups are led by students who themselves have very personal connections either through family or loved ones or themselves being affected by these policies such that they want to fight against the harm and danger, imposed by those things. All right. Men, take control of your lives. Is he not talking to women? He's only talking to men? I guess he's only talking to men. He must come from one of those sexist patriarchal societies. Men, take control of your lives. Be strong. Exercise. Get ripped. Eat your protein powder. Get your gains on, man. Oh, wait. Hold on. Never mind. Hold on. Okay, so men, take control of your lives. Be strong. Exercise. Read about the cultural Marxist theories that have led us here and want to destroy your world so you know how to fight them. I used to be afraid to debate because I was not prepared. The spiritual lives of your families are at stake. Will you decide to sit back because you're afraid of being called names, or getting punched? Oddly enough, it is the gay individuals who have had the fear of being called names and getting punched. And the policy, as it was originally expressed, included protection against such a thing by informing students that if they called any couple who was gay and was manifesting romantic behavior, if they called them any names or physically assaulted them, that they would be subject to discipline by the Honor Code Office. So there's a little bit of irony in what he's talking about here. Just this whole thing about, he's talking to the men. They have to be strong and exercise. What? Be strong and exercise? Why? So you can engage in fisticuffs and read about cultural Marxist theories. There is some validity in being informed about what is being called cultural Marxist theories and deconstructionism, because, the way that those principles are being used kind of distorts reality. And in some cases, it can help us disentangle things that we've taken for granted and have a broader understanding. But in other cases, it can be used to defend the indefensible by gaslighting you and making you think that things that you thought were one thing because they were taught and instructed as one thing in the past are now something totally different. When the church says, well, translate does not really mean translate, well, that's because they're taking a cultural Marxist perspective that is redefining words and using them according to a higher power's, present needs, despite what it's been taught in the past. These are all just word games and propaganda. But, whatever power elements need to use for that, they will use. But you have to be aware of it on both sides, because they are simply tools that can be used by powerful elements. All right, so I used to be afraid to... He does toot his horn a little bit. That's okay. It just kind of fuels the stereotype of somebody who would say that these are low testosterone men. I just can't get over that. All right. Revelation isn't the most glamorous book. Oh, we're going there. We're going to the book of Revelations. Okay. And the way it describes what happens to the lukewarm at the judgment definitely doesn't help with that. If we, the aware Latter-day Saints, guided by the Holy Spirit, are not willing to fight back against the whole world if need be for the defense of the doctrines that would bring people back to their God and for his church that administers the ordinances that we need to get back there, can we still call ourselves the salt of the earth? Which way will you choose, modern man? Never mind the women. It's only the men. And if you're a woman and you choose to back it, then we can conceive you as a man. But not really, because that's cultural Marxism. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. When you back away and you primarily read and interact with people that are ex-Mormons, you become acclimated to a perspective. And you start to see the world with a vocabulary that's informed by that perspective. And that's something that I don't think that ever being totally in a protective shell of one perspective is a good place to be, because you need to have your conceptions challenged. And part of that is understanding and confronting other perspectives so that you can test them against your own perspective and see if they hold out. And people wrestling with this issue can read something like this and can, I think, particularly if you've already been in this position of indoctrination, blind obedience, and sort of a self-righteous attitude that sees the world in black and white terms and falls under the spell of this sort of demonization and us versus them thinking, you can very much see his perspective. And when I read this, I recall my own journey out of it, and those things that caused me to say, well, wait a second, if I'm simply repeating what leaders say to me and doing so blindly, then I'm not really articulating a moral position. I'm simply obeying things. And, that's not really a good moral position to be in. So it can be interesting to go to Twitter and to just type in DesNat as your search term, because you'll get to see the types of memes and things that get shared. And, the beauty of memes is that they really are distilled and condensed ideas that you can sort of tell the power of their reproducibility by how popular they are. And so right now in DesNat, you have a theme of idolization of the prophet, taking the fact that in the past, they said that this coming general conference would be like none other, and then now taking the current events of the coronavirus and the cancellation of the physical in-person general conference replaced by a digital-only general conference and say, well, that's proof of his prophetic nature. So you can take that interpretation of a true prophecy and say, well, that then proves that their position is their position on other things, such as the gay agenda and their policies, are also true. And so it's just always interesting to see how that plays out. It's actually a little embarrassing. I think there are a lot of people who are conventional chapel Mormons that would look at some of the things that are being spread under the hashtag of DesNat and say that really is not anything like the Mormonism that I would, fall behind. Some of them rankle at the idea that they are grouped in with the alt-right, because right now the alt-right in our wider secular society is one that people perceive as endorsing more racist positions and is rooted in the racism that seems to have been given a breath of fresh air under the modern cultural milieu that we live in. Some people attribute that to Donald Trump. Other people say that racism has always existed and we're just seeing more of it now. The types of memes that they have really start to fuel the idea that they need to start to do more. That includes criticizing figures who have publicly supported this. Steve Young, famous quarterback and alumni of BYU, tweeted that he stands with the LGBTQ students of BYU in the face of this whole controversy. And in doing so, he immediately made an enemy of the people who follow DesNat. And you can see more of the theme there. The protests have nothing to do with BYU's honor code and everything to do with trying to make Christ's church bend the knee to society. The thing is, you can go back and look at the history of racism and see that the people protesting the church's policies and teachings on race were also trying to make the church bend the knee, but they were, you could make it that they're trying to make the church bend the knee to racism or bend the knee to society, but they're trying to make the church bend the knee to love and compassion and to let go of the sort of hate that can be promulgated by teaching those things. Here's another, this is the guy who just wrote that article, who stood up. If anyone IDs him, please let me know so I can smack him on the lips over the altar at the temple. Hashtag DesNat, save BYU. So this is how heroes get made. At least some of them admit that these things aren't nice. Interesting stuff. All right. Well, that's enough of me talking today. Let's see. Let me go ahead and set up the calls. Hold up just a second. All right. So if you would like to join the conversation, you can call 210-422-2222. Love to hear from you, and we'll see if there's anything to say. The topics that we've been discussing today include the coronavirus and faith healing and all of the vagaries of that, as well as the recent conflict between students and those defending what they see as defending the family on the campuses of BYU. Let's see what comments we have. Again, the number is 210-422-2222. I'm supposed to remind my viewers. Okay, hold up. We got something. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff.
John Streeter,
Hey.
you magnificent bastard.
What's on your
Enjoyed
mind?
your show as usual. Very good stuff today. And you touched on something that's kind of in my wheelhouse. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments about, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Okay, I'm right at 60 years old, and I grew up in the South. So when I was young, on TV, there was this TV evangelist called Ernest Ainsley. He's some sawed-off little weird guy, drove a pink Cadillac, or more than one, and he literally did this. And you got to understand when I tell you this, I have been, because I got a quirky sense of humor and all that, but I have been repeating this as a joke for over 40 years. He said, on more than one occasion, held his hand up to the, really close to the, camera, and said, "Put your hands upon mine on the television, and you will be healed." And he had this funky little, Southern Baptist preacher accent, but that's what he did. And he was driving these Cadillacs, so it had to be successful. So when I saw the Kenneth Copeland video, I saw it yesterday, when he literally put his hand up and did it again, I was just floored. This bullshit still works.
Yeah.
This guy's jets. Forget the Cadillacs. He's got jets. And people are sucking it up left and right. And when you showed the clip of him talking to the news reporter, that man had a crazed look in his eye,
Yeah.
But he, I think he had a formula. He's got that certain stern look. He's strutting his authority. And then when he's kind of gets serious and waggle his finger, he's going to try to intimidate.
Oh, yeah.
What a hero she was, right?
Oh, she was great.
And then he's going to break out of scripture, and then whatever you throw at him, he's going to flip it back. He's going to flip it back. So that's his formula, right? Mm-hmm. And it struck me that after years, too many years of being a TBM, the general authorities are basically doing the same thing. That they speak with that soft, loving voice, but they're using pretty much the same formula. And the sad thing is that after years of singing "Follow the Prophet, He Knows the Way," he's got that extra energy, that extra boost, and people are just going to suck it up. So anyway, and Jim Baker, I remember watching him a couple years ago, flipping through the channels. He's that silver formula stuff, whatever, for a while. They also sell a lot of doomsday stuff like solar generators and whatnot. But, so I think he's an opportunist. Jim Baker's, hey, that's the virus. Well, we've got this will help. And then I think that the church is also being opportunist as well. It breaks my heart. I'm seeing posts, and these are from people I know and attended church with in past years, right? They're basically saying, there's also a meme going around that people are posting, isn't it amazing that we have a Dr. Prophet? All this. Isn't it amazing that they set up home church, and isn't it amazing that this and that and the other? It's like, no, it just happens to be coincidence. Look.
Yeah.
Oh, Yugi said.
Yeah.
I love your dog. I have a theory about Yugi too. I think he just wants to be the only one on.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get him like his own camera one of these days or something.
He can't. There you go.
He's obnoxious.
But anyway, am I wrong? I mean, is the church?
No, you're absolutely right. It is opportunism, and the church isn't alone in doing that. I mean, even like there's this Amazon show, I think it's, or maybe it's Hulu, called The Path, and it's the story of this, what we would describe as a cult. But the very first episode is where there's this disaster tornado that's hit, and the first people that are there are the people in this group, and that is because they target vulnerable people who they can then provide a solution to, and that binds people to them. And you see this again and again after groups, and you see different flavors of it. And one of the flavors is when there's some sort of national tragedy or world tragedy that hits, then they come in and they help, and it can be a testament to their prophetic ability. It can be testament to the community and the social support structure that it seems to provide. But all of that is separate and apart from whether or not the actual teachings are true and whether or not they're healthy in the long term.
Yeah. That isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? Also, I was involved with genealogy for a while. I learned that with the poor immigrants, let's say immigrants from Ireland, because that's my descendancy, right? Okay. They come over and they get off the boat, and there's people waiting to take advantage of them. That's the world we live in. And the church is. I feel like the church is doing it, and we're just. It's just so sad. But here's a prophetic prophecy for you. No matter how all this turns out with conference and the coronavirus and all that, the president of the LDS Church, he will be a hero. There you go. That's how it's going to turn out. No matter what happens, he's the hero. Oh, thank God we followed him.
Yeah.
Anyway,
the
hand on the TV thing, when you did that, I about choked on my drink. I was drinking coffee, and I was about choking on it. And so, I got to call it a day. I'm going to call it a day. But seriously, if you just Google Ernest Angley, he was a peculiar little fellow, and he was real popular in the South. And he did that, push your hand on my thing, for so long, and it's just amazing that they're still doing it today. Yeah. It's just
another example that I love, and if you haven't seen it, you've got to check it out, and that is the John Oliver segment on televangelists. And I live in Texas, and there was this guy named Robert Tilton that back in the day, you would send him money, and he'd send you like a prayer cloth, and he'd pray. And the first time I really caught him in my radar, I'd always see him when I was flipping through the channels, but when I was in college, somebody distributed a video of him like praying, and then like every time, because he would do these like facial contortions, and then they would put the sound of flatulence right when he did it, and it was just classic. But in that clip, that guy is still around, and he still has followers. And John Oliver did this thing. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No,
I had to interject here. I don't want to be rude. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Tilton, I read a couple years ago, Tilton has like, I don't know, 16 or whatever of his most successful money makers, and he just shows them on repeat. So I think that they're airing across wherever on these cable networks old stuff, because he's getting older, obviously, right? But whatever was successful before, they just run them and just take the money in and send the claws out, and wow.
Yeah, definitely check out that segment, because John Oliver's producers and them, they actually say, okay, well, if he says to send him money, we're going to send him money, and we'll do whatever he says to do, and just see. And then he just shows you how deep, vulnerable people who don't know better than to believe those things, you fall into that trap. And so then even somebody who's been absolutely discredited, like back in the day, they did this big expose on Tilton, and they found, all these prayer things like had been dumped in the dumpster. They just took the money. And it's crazy that they're still out there doing this stuff.
Yeah. What a world, man. But anyway, hey, I'm sorry. I hate to be redundant, but I'm going to tell, you and some of the real church history heroes, that have made a difference in my life, that you guys are making a difference. John, your stuff is amazing. I've been posting some of your videos now and then, because just sincerely interested, and I hope it's bringing people over, because they get a lot of feedback when I post them. As a matter of fact, I posted one on Mormon Enlightenment, and one of the comments said, I loved blah, blah, blah. She was raving about you, and I typed your name in to tag you, but I don't think you remember that group. But anyway, so the word spread it, and just keep it up. You are making a difference. I appreciate your stuff so much, and you make me laugh. I appreciate your sense of humor as well. So thanks,
right,
man.
Thanks for the call.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Yugi? Ugh, you just want treats. That's all you want, Yugs. All right, we got another call. Let's see what we got. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Yes, I have been posting every once in a while in your comment section under the name of James Northman on my Facebook profile.
Okay.
I speak about highly controversial subjects such as I witnessed about 75 humans ritualistically killed. If you could take a look at that map that I've drawn of where I witnessed David Bednar kill a man, I would appreciate it and see what that has to do with your recollections of what happens after you cross the veil curtain before you go into the celestial room.
I think I remember seeing a few of the comments that you have. I'm not sure if somebody had flagged that because I'm not seeing them in the threads here. It's when you hear things that are so far outside of the realm of what people would say normal experiences are, even for some of these groups, even when you look at groups like Heaven's Gate and other things, you wouldn't see things that are that far outside of the norm. And so there's always the kind of the burden of proof issue, even among critics of the church. And this is something that when you study church history, you'll find, like when the Hoffman forgeries were not yet discovered and the Salamander letter came out, and even critics of the church looked at those accounts and asked themselves, are these real? Is there any other explanation for it? And then saw the evidence of it even before the expose of Hoffman as a forger. They said, there's not enough data here to back this up. And in fact, there's some conflicting and contradictory data. And so trying to search for the truth, we have to still continue to parse those things. And so a lot of the stories that what you're talking about don't fit with the paradigm that the church tends to have in terms of, if there's anything like that going on, if the church has the degree of wealth that it has, somebody who was doing that would immediately be ousted, because that's a significant vulnerability for the church, because those things will get found out eventually if they happen. And there needs to be some plausible deniability. But if you can maybe send me a link about the evidence and the data that you have, that would be something that would be probably, if we were going to explore it, would be something we would dedicate the entire show to, that, because I think that way we'd get the best exploration of it. And if you have some compelling evidence, then it's something that maybe we could have you on as a guest to talk about. Because, I think regardless of whether I agree with it, there's something to be said in terms of, how do you approach stories that seem to be outside of the realm of believability? How can you parse them out from other things?
I can relate. I worked in psychiatric nursing for the Veterans Administration. I can totally relate. You have actually blocked me, I believe, from Facebook, so you'll want to unremove that block or find me from another person's page. I wish you the best of luck, and thanks for taking my call.
Sure. Can you remind me what the name is so I can know what to unblock if I have blocked you?
I left it in your comment section. James Northman, Northman.
Okay.
It's got a cartoon character of David Bednar with a hole in his head that says kill as my profile.
Well, if you can change, I can't tell you what to do, but it'll be harder to make your, it probably erodes your credibility to have an image of somebody with a violent act on them. If you want to be heard.
Homeland Security are well aware of my page, and
no, I'm just regardless of what is legal or illegal or not. I'm just saying, if you want to try to reach people so that they'll listen to what you say, then that is a harder, that will probably tend to make it harder for people to be objective in listening to what you say if it's done with that image there. But that's just an approach sort of thing that I'm just making an observation. Certainly, however you feel like your message will be, reach people, then that's up to you. But thanks for the call.
For your advice. I also left left comments in a section when you interviewed Ryan McKnight. I left some very controversial comment sections there about child rape and death and all that in that comment section too. And I don't have access to all that stuff. That was a few years back, but thank you very much, Jonathan.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. Thanks for the call.
Bye.
Bye now. Okay, if you want to join the conversation, 210-422-2222. We'd love to hear from you. The subjects today are generally around the coronavirus and issues of faith healing. Just exactly how Yu-Gi-Oh is the stinkiest butt of all doggos everywhere. And the recent conflict of BYU and its seeming change in policy. Now, I was just brought back to the age of yesteryear, and I think since faith healing is on the menu, we should probably, I gotta do this. Okay, hold up. This is our good friend, Robert Tilton, and we just gotta hear him, because he's just so good. Okay, apparently this is the sequel.
Isn't the Lord good? Oh, the Lord is so good. Wasn't it something how that just as I came on the air, this started just bellowing and boiling out of me? Isn't that something? See, you understood it, didn't you? Isn't that something? Isn't that something? In other words, you'll be ahead instead of behind. Hello, this is the gate of heaven. This is the gate of heaven. Some people on what to do and how to prosper. Right there. That's something. I get so tickled over this. You've heard it in your heart. This is the way Maury and I got ourselves out of debt.
Okay, I'll stop it. I'm sorry. That's the immature side of my humor. That was very effective on 17-year-old me. It worked quite a bit. So definitely check out Robert Tilton's expose on John Oliver. I actually took the most poignant part of that expose where he was talking about how televangelists exploit the vulnerable in asking for money. And I spliced in some quotes from Mormon leaders to show how they just match exactly with those sorts of things. Every religious denomination is going to have a different vocabulary and a different approach to it, but there's some themes that are the same. And when you even though Mormonism does it with much, more business-like 1950s attire, then you'll find certain televangelists do it. It's essentially the same thing. All right, so if you want to join the conversation, you can call 210-422-2222. There's an interesting thing that is showing up, and that is there were some pictures of the people who counter-protested the defenders, or the people who had problems with the church's policy on LGBTQ. And one of the signs in particular was a two-part sign. And here you can see they're calling this guy Biceps Guy because look at those guns. This guy is not a low testosterone guy. This guy is ripped like Nephi. And he's got, he does have a genial smile, and he seems to be very happy about what he's doing. But when you read his sign, it starts out with, "There are no homosexual members of the church," a quote from Elder Bednar. And then he reinforces that with a very significant verse from the first section of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is that whether by mine own voice or the voice of my servants, it is the same. Now, I've done a video before on this theme, this concept that is used by leaders to make what leaders say indistinguishable from the commands of God, so that if you reject the leaders, then you have to see yourself as rejecting God. And that's a very powerful way to keep a hold on the minds of people. And you can watch documentaries about, recently I watched this documentary series called The Ministry of Evil about the experience of Tony Alamo, who ran a religious group that people would consider a cult. And one of the things that when they talked to the survivors of that group, they would say, he is our prophet. He speaks for God. And so I can't criticize him. I can't go against him because that would be like going against God. So that theme is something that you see repeated again and again in these scenarios. And this guy is just showing the raw nature of it in Mormonism. So because you can take any quote by past church leaders and put it in the top square and then put the bottom square, whether it's by mine own voice or the voice of my servants, it is the same. And you'll find it to have just the same sort of effect. And so if you go now to, let me see if I can find it. Let's see, do we have a way to sort by new? Okay. So if you go and you look at the various memes that are showing up on the ex-Mormon Reddit, one of the things that you'll see is that people have taken this format and run with it, because you can put any crazy quote from past leaders in the top box and then keep the box on the bottom to the same, and it shows you just how ridiculous this is. But I have to be able to find those examples, and it's not declared. Something I should have had prepared beforehand, but I didn't have time, so I didn't do it. Anyway, I'll invite you guys to check that out. If you find some good ones, share them, upload the image there, because it's interesting. Examples that I saw were the quote from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young that there are inhabitants on the sun and that they dress like Quakers. I think there was another one that talked about the statements by past church leaders about the racist past of the church, and if you're going to use this rhetorical device in a protest sign here, you just need to understand how that rhetorical device can be used in other ways. Here we see other examples of protest signs that are rooted really in obedience and following the prophet. Honor the code. That's the theme, that if you are at BYU, then you agreed to honor the code and to abide by the code. And if you want to take the perspective that just because a code, a policy, or a law exists, then it must be abided by and cannot be challenged, then it becomes hard to look at church history, because they originally pushed back hard against polygamy, and the whole notion of the challenge of segregation by our society dealt with looking at policies or laws in society and deciding whether they were just or right, and then trying to act on those conclusions. So if you would like to join us and share some of your thoughts, you can call 210-422-2222. Let me see if I can get the right tab back. Yugi, did you abandon me? All right, let's see here. And I'll go for that and then that. All right. Number again is 422-2222. Let's see what comments that we have. Regarding the last caller who observed that I blocked him, I generally don't block people. If there are things that are overtly violent or hateful in terms of direct threats against people or leaders, then those are things that I think I probably will block, but I haven't had to do that very frequently. It may be that one of the few times that I've had to do that was his account, and I just don't recall. I don't really pay attention to what the names are, just what the content is. Okay. John and Diane Bringhurst says, I've always wondered how to make those designs in latte. I will tell you that I'm not very good at it. I have done hundreds of these now, and there are so many variables in terms of how you make the milk, how you do the pour. One of the plans that I do have to do eventually is a series on coffee that I think Evil Apostate will host, but because he's got this whole thing about the body of the Dark Lord and worshiping the Dark Lord, which is the coffee bean. But it's something where you just have to do it again and again and again, and even then, it's crazy. I'm not very good at it. Okay. Let's see. What do we have? He's a Purell hoarder. Yeah. That Kenneth Copeland, he was clearly flaunting his excess of Purell. Let's see what else we have here. Just a reminder, if you can hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel and get the notices for future broadcasts, then you'll always be kept in the know about when we go online. Okay, Heidi Reese says, with the BYU protest and virus, people are forgetting the 100 billion. I think this is a fact of life. a news cycle, any particular element in the news cycle has a particular longevity, and it can be pushed to the back by any other news thing happening, and that's just an inevitability. It may be something that the church may use to their example, but I don't think we quite have they call that like wag the dog scenario or something. It's just one of those incidental things that the church may get the benefit of. I think there have been people who've said, we're seeing that there's difficulty in getting kits so that people can be tested. There's all sorts of challenges in terms of having respirators for ICU. It'd be great if the church took the great fund of wealth that it has in excess of $120 billion, although it may be less now because the stock market has tanked. It would be great if it took that and somehow applied it to something that could benefit all of these shortages that we're seeing. I'm sure they'll have reasons why there are great challenges to that. But we're already seeing that the church, because of the visibility given to this issue, has started to be more transparent. They recently took what was a $30 billion element of their fund and disclosed which companies that they had that money invested in. And you can see that it has hundreds of millions of dollars in companies like Apple and Google, and even some weapons manufacturers that supply the Saudis. And there's just like all sorts of interesting things. There wasn't any, it wasn't like they were investing in Philip Morris or something that's clearly against the word of wisdom. But, still we're starting to see them be more transparent. And so that's great. And I think because of the question about, well, it has all of this wealth, what sort of charitable things is it going to do with it? I think there's going to be more pressure for them to do things that are visibly charitable so that it can soften the ability of critics to really jab them with those ideas. Okay. That's really none of your business. This is a comment that came in the middle of Kenneth Copeland when the reporter said, what are you doing with that money? It's in it, what do you do with all this money? Why do you need these jets? And the Kenneth Copeland's like, that's none of your business. And that's the kind of same response that we got from the church on this whole $1 billion thing. Except the benefit of the church is the church has been so effective in conveying the idea to the members that it's none of their business what they do with the funds, that now the members are going to do that too. The members will then, if as a critic you say the church needs to tell the world what it's doing, they'll say, well, that's none of your business. And the leaders don't even have to say that, the members will. Again, if you'd like to comment, you can call 210-422-2222. Okay. Valerie Smith says, try Everclear. That was probably in reference to an alternative to Purell for hand sanitizing. You have to have something that's greater than 80% alcohol. Okay, let's see. We have a call. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Good morning, Jonathan. So nice to talk to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm convert, and I credit you for helping me see things. Actually, it was the polygamy that led me out. I know that's not the topic today. So I wanted to say about the faith healing. As a physician, how does, now the words are gone. How does somebody's belief that they'll be healed, the
placebo effect?
Thank you so much. The placebo effect, how does that come into play? Because I think perhaps with Tilton and the faith healers, they are counting on people having the placebo effect, mm-hmm. and that will bring them money.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say, I'm conflicted regarding the silver. I believe, I will sound crazy, but I believe that the silver honestly healed me of a virus, of Hep C, in 2002. And so I'm a full believer in the silver. And so while I don't agree with the televangelists selling that mm-hmm. at this time of crisis, I went through everything with my my liver doctor,
yeah, with
the viral count and everything. The silver honestly cured me, removed all traces of the Hep C. So I don't mean to condemn the medicine. Mm-hmm. And then I also wanted to say before I was Mormon, I attended faith healing. I went with a coworker who was just sure it would help me. And the clips on YouTube, excuse me, I think I'm just so overexcited by calling. But the faith healers, when I was in there, I would see the faith healers calling people up on stage, and they'd fall over, and then they'd move their arms to the left, and everyone in the wings would fall over, and everyone in the beginning of the audience would fall over, just as they moved their arms. And it was, gotta breathe. It was so much like, even in Mormonism, it was what was expected. I would see these people falling around me, and then I'd be standing or sitting, and so then they said I didn't have the faith, or I didn't have the spirit, because I wasn't subject to their physical and spiritual motions.
Yeah.
So I think that at times like these, whenever there's a crisis or a health crisis, people are they're going to go towards whatever they think will help. And I think that they're just making a killing off of that. And I don't really have much more to say, except for...
I do want to, I'd be interested in keeping you on the line while we talk about some of this stuff. So the question of the colloidal silver, that this is really, I think, humanity had to confront at some point, how do we discern between therapies that are effective and therapies that are not effective? And the placebo effect was part of that, because if we, even your own experience where you had a disease and you took a therapy and you were healed. Well, now we have to decide if attributing to the resolution of that disease to a particular therapy is an accurate attribution. Is there a fundamental misattribution that we're making there, where a certain percentage of people with a particular disease will, through the processes of your own immune system, become free of a disease? And so then you have to, this is the reason that, as a society, as the principles of the scientific method came about, and we started to use evidence in order to back up any claims of the efficacy of a medicine, as we moved towards that, then our whole goal is to try to account for and eliminate the biases that would interfere with our statistical and data conclusions. And that is something that we continue to be vigilant about in our medical journals, in academia, because that vulnerability to bias never goes away. Now, a lot of the things that we now accept as, effective medicinal therapies, such as aspirin and other drugs, were at one point a form of folk remedy and were believed to be efficacious. But once we were able to do the studies to document not only how effective they were, but what sort of side effects we could anticipate from them, in the case of Tylenol, for example, whether certain dose levels were injurious to your liver. By studying these things, we get more information and we can optimize the type of therapy that we have. So for colloidal silver, I haven't looked at any studies that have been done on it, but you'll see how, when they're selling it to you, how is it framed? And in the case of Jim Bakker and the Televangelists, they are not licensed, which means that there's no authoritative body that will hold them accountable for making false claims about the effectiveness of a drug. And and so that's one of the things that part of, as we've evolved as a as a medical profession, licensing is something that holds physicians accountable for false claims. And one of the challenges that I've had occupying a space in certain areas in politics and religion is that there are a lot of people who don't trust the institution of medicine. And that's because there are big bucks involved in it. And so a lot of people believe that these institutions of the medical academy, as well as licensing boards, are corrupt, and that they are trying to suppress the real data that would empower people to take things like colloidal silver. And it's one of these things where you really have to be equipped with the critical processes and kind of evaluate this and come to your own decision. In the instance of your experience with silver yourself, if that was something that was taken under the advice of a physician backed by evidence which would support its safe use, then that would be something that you could provide that information and that evidence and back up the use of silver. Does that necessarily mean then that whatever product Jim Bakker was selling is the same? And we don't know that. We'd have to look at that, because it's one thing to say that a particular product can be effective in a particular disease, but it's another thing to say that product A is the same thing as the product that they tested, because there can be different doses, different purities, different ways of obtaining it, and you just have to look at all of that. And that's where all of the pharmaceutical industry has the accountability that goes along with making sure that their products reflect what they actually are. So it's a big discussion, but it all really comes back down to, are we going to approach the solutions to these problems using evidence and accountability, or are we going to go back to the snake oil salesman aspect of things? And I think it's safer for us as a society if we allow the types of institutional accountability, people challenging existing dogma on what types of therapy work and what are effective, and making sure that the data holds up. There are still problems that we have in how we pursue these things, in terms of, if one research project comes to one conclusion, ideally you have other people try to replicate that research and see if it persists over time. And there may be, there's some instances where we would benefit from having more reproduced research trials. But, when you're faced with something like coronavirus, where it is happening so rapidly that people are trying to find something that is effective as soon as possible, then we kind of just go with the best thing that we can, but still through those avenues that are accountable, and try to apply the best principles and practices that we have. So that's a long answer to your comment there, but I appreciate you bringing that up, because we all struggle with that. Once you get to the point where you're like, well, what is real, what is true, that can be applied to religion, that can be applied to therapies that anyone would extend to you. And I think that's where we're all best served, by trying to keep things down to a logical, rational, research and evidence-based approach to things.
Excellent answer. I really appreciate that, because I did believe myself a rational person. I didn't go for this as just this. I was desperate at the time, but I wasn't looking for a cure. My family member was. Mm-hmm. And right at the time, the interferon treatment was $80,000 cash, which I didn't have. And so it was more of a cheaper alternative or option. And again, people like back in the day when this happened, Naomi Judd was, she went into remission doing nothing from Hep C. And so some people do. Absolutely. And there can be dangers. And my sister, because of my healing, my sister became a proponent of silver, and she made it, and she did not follow the directions correctly, and now she is gray. She has an actual blue tinge from taking too much. So I mean, I completely understand it should have been under the guidance of physicians. At the time, I tried to do everything medically correct. I got my viral count load and things like that I needed beforehand and afterwards to show. But it just seems so miraculous. And sometimes when you feel such a relief, then it's easy to go sway to the other side and say, oh, these miracle cures help or work. And so I think there's the danger on both sides. Yeah. I think that it should be done medically. Mine wasn't done medically, but I did do things carefully. And I just appreciate you addressing that.
No problem. I really also appreciate your comment about the placebo effect, because it is real. And whether or not televangelists or faith healers take advantage of that is probably a separate issue from whether or not the placebo effect is real. Because even let's assume that there was no such thing as a placebo effect and that it wasn't real. Well, statistically, in most disease processes, a certain number of people will get healed anyway, just through the body's immune system. And so just that fact alone allows some faith healer to apply something to a population of people. And then those populations, that percentage of people who do get healed, will misattribute their participation in the faith healing to that particular healing, and then that will be reinforced. And so then the people who don't get healed, well, people just don't talk about that. It's just a lost data point. And so it seems like, it's such a powerful thing. And it's just when you step back and you look at this statistics, all this, and the realistic nature of it, than it is. Now, in terms of how does the placebo effect play into this, I think that if there was some sort of study done that showed that people who received blessings and a higher percentage of them got healed from a particular ailment, then because we understand that there is a placebo effect where there's a undefinable connection between something in your mental state and your ability to heal from some particular ailment, such that if you give one group of people a sugar pill and another group of people no therapy, then the group of people who get the sugar pill, there will be a statistically significant higher or quicker rate of improvement. Well, that effect, then you have to challenge the priesthood blessing or what other faith healing thing you did against the placebo effect. And it would have to not only show that there was a greater number of healings or quicker healing from the priesthood blessing group versus the no priesthood blessing or no faith arm, but it actually has to be even greater of a degree of healing, statistically greater than the placebo effect itself. So you would have to account for the placebo effect. So that's just the way that you'd have to approach that.
Okay. In religious circles here, in Southern California, there was a study done by a Dr. Cherry in my town where I live now, and years ago, and they tried that, and they always tout it. The religious institutions tout that as proof that prayer works, and so I find it interesting that some people have tried to do that a little bit, but no, they haven't followed that up. It's been 30 or 40 years since that.
Yeah, I read a study too where it was I think it was dealing with fertility, people who were struggling with fertility, and you'd have one arm where there were people, nobody prayed for the people trying to get pregnant, and then the other arm you had people praying that they would get pregnant, that this other group, and then you had a secondary group praying that the prayers of the first group would get heard. And so there may have been too many variables, but their claim at the end was that there was a statistically significant difference in the two groups, and the ones who prayed, had prayer for their pregnancy, more of them were fertile ultimately at the end of the study. So I think that you could then extend that study and say, well, which God are you praying to? Because maybe they were all praying to Cthulhu. I don't know.
I love it. That's funny.
Anyway, thanks for the call. Go ahead.
Can I add one more thing?
Please do.
I do believe that in my family was very religious. They're not Mormon. I converted and was Mormon for about 3 years. And then as soon as I found out about polygamy, I was done. Because Ellen White, the prophet of my family,
oh, really?
She lied. And she said, do as I say and not as I do. And she, of course, said no coffee, no sausage, no pork, no meat, and all kinds of things. No night air. Don't open your windows at night. Things like that were later proven wrong. But
now, remind me, Ellen G. White, is that the Seventh-day Adventist?
Seventh-day,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so my family believed that there were no gays. No gays. There's no such thing as gays. Oh, some people made these choices. But as soon as someone that's beloved in the family comes out, it forces all of the older family members to rethink their position. And I think that it's such a new, this is such a new stage in Mormonism that I do feel that some of these kids from BYU are killing themselves rather than forcing their family to go through this but they don't realize that it could be the best thing in the world. Most families still are going to love their children, or they're going to embrace them, most of them. I mean, it will force people to look at the issue and say that it's not just bad people or different people that have this. I mean, it's really been cathartic in my family. And so as more families have to deal with this, I think that in time it'll come as a natural change. It's not fast enough in Mormonism, but I've seen some real devastation in the wards in Southern California, just with people not accepting their own children. So very interesting. You had made a comment that once they face a family member, they'll change or are more likely to think things through, and I do believe that that's correct.
Yeah, I love, there's a bumper sticker out there that says, be careful who you hate because it may be somebody that you love. And I think there's a really powerful message behind that. And for me, I mean, the lesson for that is it's okay to go ahead right now and do that thought experiment. What if, if you're a parent of a young child, really, really ask yourself, what would happen if my child eventually at some point came out to me as gay or as something other than what the church prescribes? How would I approach that? Would I try to demonize them? Would I cut them out of my family? Would I do this thing that the church is trying to do now where you do lip service to love and acceptance, but you still hold to the idea that they are in need of fixing and that at some point, if not this life, then the next, they will be fixed as long as they remain celibate and close off that whole aspect of the human existence that is the romantic and emotional connection that you may have with another person. It's a really challenging thing. And I usually have Bill Rill as my co-host here, and I've followed him back from when he was more on the apologetic, kind of the nuanced apologetic side of things. And I remember the podcast that he was on that he would later say was a big part of his own sea change in this issue. And it was where he was confronted with the issue of himself. If you were gay, could you be celibate for your whole life? And he would say that caused him to really step back and say, wait a second, this is what we're asking of people faced with this issue, and is it right? Is it just? And it was something that really affected him because it allowed him to approach the issue from a perspective of empathy and really try to understand in a way that maybe he hadn't done before. So,
wow. Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much for the call.
Well, you have a great morning.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm trying to see what sort of comments we have. The phone lines are empty now, so if you want to call in with a comment on the topics for today or something related, it's 210-422-2222. I wanted to follow up on this comment regarding that stare. If you remember when we were watching Kenneth Copeland confronted by the reporter, at one point he gives them, and he's like this cold, he's got these steel blue eyes, and he points at the reporter and gives them this stare. And it's funny when you look at narcissistic individuals who are in these positions, that stare is something that you will see used not infrequently, and it draws on the idea, and particularly in our culture, that people are very uncomfortable by long, sustained gaze. If you're looking at somebody for a long time without saying anything, that there's an feeling of discomfort that happens. And when people visited Nauvoo, they would describe Joseph Smith, people who were not Mormon, and one of the things that they commented on was his intense gaze. So you can see some elements of that. All right, we've got a call. This is Talk on Things and Stuff. How are you doing today?
Hello, Jonathan. My name's Michael.
Hey, Mike. How are you doing?
Great. First, I just wanted to thank you for all your work.
I appreciate the comment.
So many of your essays on the priesthood ban, its history, and its inconsistency as far as, the reasons given for it, doctrines.
Yeah.
It helped me to finally confront the fact that I could no longer believe that leaders of the church spoke with God and were guided by him.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you a question about these recent changes at BYU as they relate to the history of the church doing away with the priesthood ban.
What's on your mind?
Would you be willing to make a prediction as to when the church would finally come out and say that civil marriage between gay couples is not a sin? Do you think that's ever going to happen?
I think it is inevitable, but it's something that would only take place through, I guess, what you could see as the law of attrition in the church, which is that certain leaders would need to die off first. And when I say die off, I mean that, they are very old, and there is, at some point, some of them will pass away through natural means. But when they pass away, some of the positions that they held pass away with them. And the church is fond, and the prophets are fond of saying that all of their decisions are made by unanimous vote. And that in and of itself is deeply problematic. But what it does give you the sense of is that there does have to be enough of support of a particular position that the church conforms to it, and that they're weighing the political and social ramifications of holding on to a position with their doctrinal position. And we've seen, as even the defenders of the church are aware, they do have some weaknesses in their history regarding polygamy and racism that will be part of that calculation, because they know they can reverse position on central elements of their theology. And they do some things very softly. If you look at the verbiage in the temple ceremony, I think as a believing Mormon, I would have been astounded if they would significantly change any element of the temple ceremony. But they absolutely changed to whom Eve was covenanting obedience. So now the verbiage of her oath of obedience is identical to Adam's, whereas previously she was placed under Adam and Adam was placed under God. If you change the people you are making a contract with, that's a totally different contract. And the church softly and subtly changed that as part of its evolution of its inherent sexism. And I think that the change on the issue of civil marriage of gay people and even temple marriage of gay people is going to adapt. It'll just mean that the people who have been the hardest lines will no longer be in positions of power. And you'll probably have people like Garrett Gong who have had the benefit of people close to them who they love, who they absolutely can see as full dynamic humans going through life with that experience that can only be seen as a burden if you're in the domain of the church. And if you compare the burden that someone in the church with that lived experience is to somebody who's outside of the church, who's free to experience life without that burden, hopefully that would soften his heart on this issue. And then when more people like him rose in the ranks in the church, then we'd start to see some changes on these things. So that's, again, a long answer.
No, thank you. But, personally, I'm pretty young. I wasn't around before the priesthood ban was done away with. So I have trouble comparing the attitudes of members in the 70s to attitudes of members about gay people now. Yeah. I could see somebody in my own age group being a general authority who tries to do away with any sort of prohibition against gay marriage in the church. But I would personally give it until about 2040. I don't think it would happen sooner than that, but I don't think the church would last much longer than that as a large institution without severe cultural backlash.
Yeah.
What do you think? How long do you think it's going to take?
You mean when you look at like the stuff that I've written about, like starting with Lowry Nelson, which is kind of the first documented real pushback against the modern era of the church's racism, and that was in 1949. And so it took between 1949 and 1978. So you're talking about, something like 30 years. And so, we're seeing the church, I think probably the greatest threshold that was crossed was when it first published the Mormon and Gays website. And it had the acknowledgement on that website that some people are born with this by nature, rather than it being the product of a conscious choice of iniquity after being led by, a delicate thread down the pathway of wickedness or whatever they used to say it was. So, for me, that's kind of like the first acknowledgement. But, if we take the same time course that would have towards crossing a threshold like acceptance of the priesthood ban, give it 30 years. So, we're talking about something like 2030 or 2038, almost 2040. And, that doesn't even speak to the fact that there were certain doctrinal principles behind its position on racism before 1978 that were not disavowed until another 30 to 40 years after it changed its policy. And so if we were to expect that sort of thing to happen as well, then there may be elements of what they see as the doctrinal position behind their policies on LGBT individuals continue to persist and continue to affect the minds and thoughts and actions of church members even beyond any change in policy. But, who knows? In the internet age and in the age where you're exposed to more different ideas through social media, the time frame, a lot of these things probably is going to be contracted quite a bit, particularly when organizations that have policies that are reprehensible like that pay higher and heavier costs in the social media age than ever in the past. And so we'll see. I mean, if people can rally around petitions or things to cause real consequences in terms, there are people who are saying that because of the church's adherence to its anti-LGBT policies in terms of the honor code, then organizations that the church depends on for participation in like NCAA or National College Athletic Association, be able to play sports, much like back in the past, there need to be repercussions about that. And university accreditation bodies, other external entities to the church for whom the church relies on in order to exist in the academic space or in the religious space may start to hold them accountable, and we'll start to see quicker changes. But in the meantime, that's not, clearly we thought it was happening, and it did feel like we've reset the clock on some of this change with its reversal or apparent reversal on the BYU campus. All right. Anything else on your mind?
No, I only hope that you're right and that the time frame is compressed because, like many others like you, I'm sure I have a lot of extended family in the church, and any changes the church can make to make itself a more welcoming and less oppressive environment for those who do still have faith is something I look forward to.
Yeah. And there's two sides to that. Even when I consider, when I consider my work, you have the side of trying to soften the people in the position of power in the church, trying to soften how they influence and affect the minds and hearts of their members. But then the other side of that is empowering people to not be absolutely dependent for their worldview and for their self-conception on men claiming false authority from God. And I think when people start to see the disparity between the position of these church leaders and the empathy, compassion, and real lived experience that they have with themselves as LGBT or their friends and loved ones as LGBT, they'll start to see that disparity, and that in and of itself creates a bit of a searching mind and a searching heart to try to know what is right and what is wrong and what can we actually believe in. And that's where work like John DeLynn, what I'm trying to do here, and many other people, you have Mormons building bridges, other people who are willing to explore and expand on this space and make a case for people to start to center their moral compass within themselves rather than simply deferring to priesthood brethren. And that is very empowering, because then once you get to that place, then it doesn't matter what these brethren do, people will still have more of a autonomous idea and view of themselves. No one will be able to take away their worth or their value, because it will be something that they've started to flex those muscles to see as coming from within themselves, rather than relying on the brethren to tell them what their worth and what their value is. So that's
change in the church is a double-edged sword. The more welcoming the environment is, the better it is, the healthier it is for members. But on the other hand, the longer they keep the hardline stances, the more likely people are to break free.
Yeah. And that's where they could, they have the wealth, they have the facilities, they could really transform and have kind of both worlds in a way that, if to their benefit, they have such a large body of wealth now that they can be self-sustaining even at the current state that they're at now and still seem like a strong force. And you compare that to some of the other churches where, as they saw the decline in membership, they were dependent on the funds coming from those memberships to maintain itself. And so you see them having to sell off buildings and really reduce the scope and size of their programs. Well, if the church would take advantage of their financial wherewithal and really transform some of their doctrinal problems, they could reclaim and recapture some of that stuff. But they don't seem to have a way forward from that, because they seem to be making missteps every chance that they can by holding on to those ideas that they have, and it's all central to them maintaining this authoritative position. And they really have to let go of it and realize that it's okay to let go of this notion that they speak for God. They can still do a great deal of positive work in the lives of members, but you have to recreate the culture of the church so that it is open and accepting to people with many different perspectives, and there aren't purity tests on thought.
One can only hope. But I'll call you back in 2035 and see if you're right and if they change their mind about gay marriage by them.
All right.
Again, Jonathan.
Okay, take care. Thanks for the call. Okay. Heidi Reese says, I think sexism should also be protested at BYU. And that's something where we've seen that there is an element of sexism that even pervades the faculty, where in the past it has been harder to be a woman on the faculty at BYU. And there have been some changes in progress in that regard. But, all of these old, outdated positions that are, find their seeds in the past in the church continue to persist. It does take time to get rid of them. And it is through these types of protests that visibility to these issues come that can call for change. So I think having protests on a school campus is a great thing. It's something that is evidence that that young people are doing what they're supposed to be doing on a campus, challenging ideas and finding ways to affect change. And so I just hope that is something that the university is able to accommodate in a way that is healthy and acknowledges that that's part of the function of a university environment, is to have ideas challenged and to wrestle and work with those things. Even outside of BYU, our society is dealing with having the established dogmatic norms challenged, even on, I think, things that are causing that fear of that level of challenge. When we were reading the words of, for example, this BYU student who read the Proclamation on the Family, he talked about how you need to be familiar with cultural Marxism and you need to be aware of its tenets so that you can challenge them. Well, cultural Marxism is code speak for people that follow Jordan Peterson and that are aware of how issues with transgender people and with how we use language in terms of pronouns and the concept of whether or not we deal with binary sexuality or non-binary, all of those things are fed in under the umbrella of cultural Marxism. And some of the fears that they have, where universities are so strangled by the need to be politically correct that we're totally clamping down on one side of an issue and completely silencing anyone who may have a different perspective, those are things that universities have to struggle with, because in the past, universities have been spaces where people can really wrestle and deal with these issues, exploring both sides. And that's really how people learn and grow on that. And when that process is disrupted, then it can be a sign of, real challenges to this notion that we are supposed to have a free and open society that allows ideas to be brought onto the stage and to be challenged and stand or fall based on how that challenge is met. So hopefully we'll see BYU be able to join that academic process. All right, so let's see. Gimpy Geezer, if you had a Yugi Cam, you would know if he abandoned you. It would happen more often than not. Okay, Yugi, they're talking about you. What are you doing? You're back. He comes here and he steals one of these things. And this is what's going to happen. He's going to take it. Oh, you're done? You're done. Okay, fine. As soon as I'm going to find these buried all over my house. They're going to be under pillows, under mattresses, because that's how Yugi do. Okay, so again, you can join the conversation, 210-422-2222. Let's see. What is the situation of foreign missionaries who were sent by their inspiration? Well, this is one of those things where you only have to look at one side of things. We can say that because Nelson said that the next General Conference was going to be unlike anything before, we can interpret that as he made a prophetic declaration. He looked into the future and knew it was going to be different and that we had to be prepared. But we're not going to look at the fact that if they sent a bunch of missionaries to England and Europe, that they're immediately going to have to pull back, that's a sign that maybe they didn't have, these prophets and apostles, they didn't have a view into the future. We're going to ignore that data point, because remember that people in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles are involved in making the assignments for every one of those missionaries. Okay. Temak Shakur says, so happy, no more church. There is still church. It's just going to take place at home. Although I will say, not having to get dressed in the monkey suit every week is a great thing. And I would have welcomed it with open arms were I a believing member. But see, this is going to be the challenge of the church, is everyone is going to get used to Second Saturday. And those of us who are no longer in the church have, the church of Second Saturday is really, really appealing. And so they're going to give people a taste of Second Saturday, and then they're going to try to go back to 2-hour church after that. And then people are going to be like, wait a second, this 2-hour church is ridiculous. Give me back to Second Saturday. We'll see. I don't know. These people they're believing members, and they believe their leaders are inspired. So they'll find positive and effective things no matter what happens. Some things can be relied on, that church members will find positive things in what the brethren do, just like I can rely on Yu-Gi-Oh to be obnoxious during every episode. Okay, Yugi. All right, well, I think we may have reached the end of any calls that we're going to get. There's no other stuff that I had on my list to cover for today, and we're approaching 2.5 hours, and I think that's more time than should probably be dedicated to these things. Yu-Gi-Oh is now showing everybody his butt, and so that means that it is time to be done. So with that said, until next time, this has been Coffee Talk on Things and Stuff. Yu-Gi-Oh, why don't you try facing people? All right, and we will see you next time.